create employment between 2004 and 2010. Employment growth was 4%. Today, 0.2%. There's almost no job creation today in the job market. Finally, poverty in Egypt decreased between 2005 and 2008 due to large economic growth, a fact empirically verified. The incidence of poverty and near poverty fell by about 20% during that high growth period. And finally, economic activity and also lower tax rates has led to higher tax revenues. 15% of GDP, that was a historical high. Egypt also benefited from several one-off income windfalls, like the sale of the mobile license, I think it was 2006. These factors have improved fiscal sustainability in Egypt. These resources have provided an opportunity that was not used to finance redistributive policy and promote inclusive growth. This did not happen. I'm not in favor of trickle down. Distribution will not happen automatically. It's a conscious effort that policymakers should work on. But growth could make things happen faster and perhaps with fewer trade-offs. It's not just that we need to grow, it's also about how we grow. So that's it. I'm going to save 30 minutes. And I hope I did not jeopardize my next promotion. Because I'm good at my boss.
Now, you're promoted already.
Thank you. Now, what do you have like this?
Well, friends, ladies, and gentlemen, I rise not to bury growth, but to praise equity. And I rise not just to praise equity, but to bury this motion. We on this side of the House, friends, ladies, and gentlemen, reject this motion in its formulation and in its substance. We reject the formulation that growth is about economics and equity is about politics. In fact, achieving growth, in our view, is as much about the social and the political as it is about the economic. And equity is not just about politics, it is also about justice. A society without justice does not deserve to endure, and a society without justice will not endure for long. Moreover, without equity, without justice, the conditions for sustained growth will not endure. But the formulation of the motion, friends, ladies, and gentlemen, is that growth is more urgent than equity. I want to argue, and our side of the House wants to argue, that in fact there is an urgency about equity. Why do we argue that? There is a technical progress train that is heading our way, ladies and gentlemen. There is a technical progress train which is leading to rising productivity, but it is raising the productivity of capital faster than it is raising the productivity of labor, and it is raising the productivity of skilled labor faster than it is raising the productivity of unskilled labor. With this train coming towards us, which has been coming towards us for the last 20 years, and this is what the world is going to look like in the next 20 years, a business as usual scenario will mean rising inequality in all parts of the world. And this is what we've been seeing in Asia, in East Asia, throughout the world, inequality is on the rise. There's one part of the world where inequality is not on the rise, and that is Latin America. Why is that? It's because the government has proactively moved against this global trend. The government has proactively undertaken policies to address the issue of equity. And that is why in that part of the world, this global trend has been reversed. But if we don't move to reverse that global trend, if we don't move to counteract that global trend, we will indeed be hit by the tsunami of rising inequality. We'll be living in an unjust society, and an unjust society does not deserve to endure, and an unjust society will not endure. Let me make one further point about equity. Typically, as economists, we talk about inequality in terms of differences between persons. Ahmed talked about the minister and the nomad. We talk about the top 1% and the bottom 99%. But there is another dimension of equity which is very important. And that is equity between broadly socio-political groups, between men and women, between north and south, between urban and rural, between religious groups, between ethnic groups, and so on. And in our parts of the world, these divisions are pretty significant throughout Africa, throughout North Africa. And when this train of rising inequality intersects with deep social fissures in society, that's when social tensions really rise, when social cohesion crumbles, and that's what leads to a breakdown in the growth process itself. So, let let me conclude by saying that we reject the motion as it is formulated. Growth is indeed, growth is not just about economics, it is about the social and political, and equity is not just about politics, it is about justice, and indeed it is also about economics. There is a train coming towards us of rising inequality, and if we don't address it now, we will be drowned by that tsunami. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're done with the opening arguments and we move to cross-examination. We have 20 minutes for this section. Let me put to you, because we're talking about Arab countries in transition, so let's start from the starting points. Despite aggressive rates of growth in the years preceding 2011, governments were toppled by uprisings in several Arab countries. So, does this mean A, that the trickle-down effect theories are simply fantasies, or B, that people just go impatient? Let's start by Yubel.
Okay, I'll just pick up on my closing statement is that I don't think the trickle down happened. I'm not a fan of trickle down. I think that government should be proactive in pursuing this active distributed policies. What we witnessed is yes, high growth, very high growth during Egypt between 2005 and 2007, exceeded 7% in some of the years. I think there are two main reasons why the trickle down did not happen. One, I think the sources of growth, it's again how we grew. Egypt grew in capital-intensive sectors. Maybe Egypt has very high energy subsidies, very automatically subsidizing energy-intensive industries. The growth was not happening in the part of the economy. And second thing, even this growth was not evenly distributed, and the government did not do anything to hit it towards the average majority of the population, like the middle class. People were left out of the growth of the benefits, like youth, women, people in rural Upper Egypt. So I'm not personally a fan of trickle down. For trickle down to happen, government must be active. But in order for us to be able to trickle down, we should have growth. We need to increase the size of the pie. So this should come first.
Okay. Shanta, maybe a word of support to trickle-down effects theories, or you're not a believer in it as well?
No, I think we need to be clear what we're talking about here. First of all, the growth was high, but not high enough in the Arab countries in transition. Think about that the fact that the growth did not generate the kind of job, that unemployment was actually extraordinarily high in this period, means that there wasn't enough growth. China did not have this kind of unemployment nor this kind of growth. But the second thing that it should be said is that most of these governments follow equity-improving policies, the kind that our opponents are talking about. Food subsidies, fuel subsidies, free health, free education, and they failed miserably. They failed miserably because of the politics of equity. That is the other side of this motion that we want to destroy. Because the politics of equity means that these fuel subsidies were captured by the elites. Things that were supposed to be in the name of the poor were captured by the rich. So it is very dangerous to pursue the politics of equity at the expense of growth that will generate jobs for the 26% of the young people who are currently unemployed in these countries.
Dr. Garrett, you want to respond to that?
Shanta never ceases to impress me. At this time, he said actually it's not a question of trickle down to work out, nor a question of what is the other one? He said people are impatient. He shifted to something else. He actually said that growth was not high enough. So all you need to do is just work harder to make sure that growth is even higher than higher. How can you do that? There are limits to the sky. Now, the more serious point, though, is that it's really the link between politics and economics. taking policies that will elevate higher growth is not good enough. Because the fact of the matter is that there is something called the politics of policy. The fact of the matter is that the nature of the political regime is the one that decides on which policies to adopt and which policies not to adopt, whom they favor and whom they don't. And if the political regime is biased in favor of the people who wear nice suits, like you, then you are not going to get any improvement in inequality, you are not going to get people bothering about reducing poverty, none of the above. So the fact of the matter is, previously we had an elite, a political regime that was biased in favor of a group. And now we have an opening in transitional countries. I am quite optimistic about what kind of policy the political opening is likely to generate in terms of what policies people are going to adopt. And they are going to be much more sensible policies than in the past. And you are not going to be accusing the regime of you are doing subsidies for the poor, therefore, and it's badly used. Hopefully, they are going to be smarter. And if they are not smarter, the Egyptians are going to go on the street and ask them out. So the problem really is not in trickling down or not, people being impatient or not. The problem was the character of the political regime that's now being changed. One would hope that with a more inclusive political institution, better policies will be adopted and there will be more equity rather than asking for higher growth, you will be having more equity and hopefully in the process, as we would argue later, more egalitarian society actually grow faster than less egalitarian society. Thank you.
So let's start playing with practical scenarios. In Egypt, we have a huge budget deficit, and we can either increase revenues or cut spending. And my question is to you, Rahul, in such a case, in a case like Egypt, what would you go for? Would you increase taxes on the rich, or would you cut more subsidies?
This is probably a question for the former finance minister. Let me try and address that question. So I think there are major sources of revenue which are untapped in all of our countries, and I believe the problem with accessing them is again a political problem, not necessarily an economic problem. The central source, the main source of revenue, which I believe can be accessed, should be accessed, is the rising value of land and property across urban areas in all of our countries. Not just in Middle East and North Africa, but in East Asia, everywhere. And this policy of taxing the rising value of land and of property would get support across the board. Would get support from the IMF, who would be very, very keen on fiscal balance. It would actually get support from mainline economists who actually support taxation of property as being an efficient form of taxation. And that additional source of revenue would help close the deficit. And I would not be in favor of closing the deficit at the expense of, or rather on the backs of the poor. That would be my position.
Okay. And Huda, so one of the issues that have been quite controversial in Egypt in recent years has been the real estate tax, which is one example of property taxes that can be raised. Would you go for increasing these taxes?
I think that, yes, Egypt does, we have a financing problem. It's been there for years and it's there now. The real estate tax is, I think, feasible, doable, but I'm worried about right now how much money will it bring. I think this is the solution. Maybe I lost what I wanted to say.
So you don't think that it should be raised? You think that?
No, I think it should be raised, but I'm worried about more important things like corruption, for instance. Would you be able, yes, the regime is changing, but how about law enforcement? With the government, is it the right time to do this, given that we need to estimate the land, it's been, we've been toying with this idea for years, but is this the right time to raise it?
Okay, so more state.
Yes, I'm worried about corruption.
The bigger role for the state would cause more inefficiencies.
I'm worried about corruption,
where is the inequity coming from? People typically talk about differentiation with respect to income, but they hardly ever talk about differentiation with respect to assets. And I think the big shift that Piketty's book has done is to make us rethink that issue and worry a lot more about not differentiation with respect to income, but with respect to assets. In fact, there is one additional point that I want to make there, which is, it is not only whether you, I mean, it does matter a great deal how you made your income and assets. And there is a distinction between those who made it through harder work. People are working hard, they deserve to have more. That I fully understand. However, if you are making more money and more assets, acquiring more assets, simply because you just bought a piece of land and the prices went up and you are making money for no good reason, this is just not justifiable. And the sad part of the story is that Piketty's book says that inequality right now globally in different countries, especially in developed countries, because most of the work that was done was in Europe and the US and Japan and so on, is that inequality with respect to assets has come as bad as it was 1 century ago. And the real reason for that rise in inequality at a staggering magnitude, he has the numbers, is not because the rich are working harder and being rewarded. They are making it for the wrong reason. So that is something that worries about. Why am I saying all that? To link it with your question. Do we need to tax real estate? Absolutely. Egypt was probably the only country I know where we did not have a system that has been revisited for the last 100 years, from Muhammad Ali's time or something. And it is true that real estate assets, governments have to pay the land and extend water and provide electricity. Somebody has to pay for that. And if people are living in very good places, I think it is fair to ask them to contribute to society. So I find it totally justified. Now, the details of it is another matter altogether. How much it will generate, the timing of it, and this and that. This is something that can be discussed on the practical grounds.
But as a matter of principle, you would support it. As a matter of principle, you would go for it before you go to substance.
Absolutely. Can I just say that both Rafi and Ahmed just made the strongest argument for the proposition of this debate. Because they're both talking about a tax that is thing. Let me explain. You're both talking about a tax, a real estate tax, that is the least distortionary tax. That's the least deadweight laws. So they're really interested in efficiency. And that's exactly what the point of this debate is. If you want to reduce poverty, do it in the most growth-enhancing way. These taxes are the ones that will increase growth. So they are prioritizing growth over equity in order to achieve poverty.
No, on the contrary, I would, the issue let me start by saying that the estate tax will take a lot of time to set up and so on and so forth. I would say all the more reason to start now. But that is the urgency. I was focusing on the urgency part of the motion. And the reason why we're focusing on this is to raise the revenue in order to maintain the equity part of the argument. So I don't believe we are giving in to the other side at all.
Okay, so let me put another choice to you, Shaman. So, you're having in a country, in Arab countries in transition, generally you have very high poverty rates, you have deteriorating health and education conditions. What do? You do nothing, the poor will just have to wait until the economy picks up? Or you pump money into these sectors, health, education, social security, while you're not expecting any economic returns in the short term?
I don't do either. There's a third alternative. Because those are the kind of alternatives that the pro-equity camp will advocate. Spend more money on health. Spend more money on education. The trouble is it doesn't educate people. It doesn't improve their health. This country spends extraordinary amounts of money on education, and the quality of education is extraordinarily poor. So what I would do is revise the system, develop policies that make